I'm standing on top of my concrete flood wall, coffee in one hand, watching the HOA president scream at me from a rescue boat. She's waist-deep in brown water, wearing a life vest, pointing at my house like I'm the criminal. Her million-dollar home behind her? Filling up fast. Cars floating down the street. Families evacuating through second-story windows. My property? Bone dry. Perfect green lawn. Not a single drop inside. 7 days ago, she handed me a lawsuit. 30 days to tear down this ugly eyesore or lose everything I own. She called it a bunker. An embarrassment to the neighborhood. I tried to warn them. I'm a retired Army Corps engineer. I know what's coming when the water starts to rise. They laughed at me. What I didn't know then was where our HOA fees actually went. That decision cost them everything. Before we jump into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. And if you've ever had a crazy HOA moment, hit subscribe so you don't miss how this ends. I bought the house in Riverside Meadows 3 years ago. Quiet street. Tall trees. The kind of neighborhood where people wave at each other and complain about lawn care. It looked perfect. What I didn't notice during the walkthrough was how low the property sat. Or that the storm drains on our street hadn't been updated since 1987. I didn't think to check. Why would I? I'm a retired Army Corps engineer. Spent 30 years building levees, managing watersheds, reading elevation maps in my sleep. When I moved in, I ran my own survey out of habit. Just curiosity. The data came back clear. My lot sat in a moderate flood zone. Not extreme, but enough that a heavy rain season could mean trouble. The neighborhood drainage system was outdated. Undersized pipes. Poor grading. One significant storm and the water would have nowhere to go. I mentioned it once at an HOA meeting. Casually. Just a heads up. The president, Sandra Calloway, smiled at me like I'd told a joke. She said flooding wasn't a concern here. Never had been. This is a premium community. We have standards. I didn't push it. I just moved in. I wasn't trying to make enemies. But I also wasn't going to ignore the data. So I applied for a permit. A reinforced concrete flood wall. 6 feet tall. Engineered drainage built into the base. It would wrap around my property line and keep water out if the street ever flooded. The county approved it in 4 weeks. Everything was by the book. I hired a crew. We poured the foundation in sections. Rebar. Proper grading. It wasn't pretty, but it was bulletproof. That's when Sandra showed up. She didn't knock. Just walked into my driveway while the concrete was still setting and asked what I thought I was doing. I explained the permit, the flood risk, the engineering behind it. She stared at the wall like I'd just built a prison. She said it was hideous, that it ruined the aesthetic of the neighborhood, that property values would drop. I told her the county had already signed off. She said the county doesn't live here. We do. 2 weeks later, I got the first letter. Hand-delivered. Not mailed. Sandra walked it to my door herself and waited while I read it. The HOA was formally requesting that I halt construction and submit my plans for architectural review. I told her I'd already submitted everything to the county. She said that wasn't enough. Our community has guidelines. A committee. The process. I told her the wall was almost finished. She said that was unfortunate, because if I didn't comply, there would be consequences. I didn't take it seriously. Not then. I've dealt with bureaucrats my whole career. I know how to navigate red tape. I had permits, approvals, documentation. I thought that would be enough. What I didn't realize was that Sandra wasn't interested in permits. She was interested in control. The second letter came 3 days after the wall was finished. This one wasn't hand-delivered. It came certified mail. Legal letterhead. The HOA was filing a formal violation. The wall was not approved by the Architectural Review Committee. It violated community standards under Section 4.7 of the Covenant. Exterior modifications must maintain neighborhood character and aesthetic unity. They were demanding I remove it within 30 days. If I refused, they would pursue legal action. Fines. Liens. Whatever it took. I read that letter twice. Then I called my attorney. He told me the HOA had the right to enforce covenants. But he also said I had a county permit. That should carry weight. He said we could fight it, but it would take time and money, and there was no guarantee we'd win. I asked him what happened if I just left the wall up. He said they'd sue, and they'd probably win, because HOAs almost always do. That should have been the end of it. A legal fight, lawyers, paperwork, months of back and forth. But it didn't go that way, because 4 days later, the weather forecast changed, and Sandra made a decision that would cost her everything. The weather report came in on a Thursday morning. Tropical storm Melissa. Category downgraded, but still carrying heavy rain. Expected to stall over our region for 72 hours. Forecasters were predicting 6 to 9 inches. Maybe more in low-lying areas. I pulled up the elevation maps again. Ran the numbers. If we got 8 inches in 2 days, the street drains wouldn't handle it. Water would pool. I sent an email to the HOA. Attached the forecast. Suggested they check the drainage system. Make sure the catch basins were clear. Sandra replied in under an hour. Thank you for your concern. Our infrastructure is maintained regularly. No action needed. That was it. No follow-up. No inspection. Just dismissal. I walked the neighborhood that afternoon. Checked the storm drains myself. 3 of them were clogged with leaves and debris. 1 was completely blocked. I took pictures. Sent another email. This time Sandra didn't reply at all. The lawsuit paperwork arrived the next day. Friday, 24 hours before the storm was supposed to hit. Official complaint filed with the county court. The HOA was seeking immediate injunctive relief. They wanted the wall removed. They wanted me to pay for removal. And they wanted damages for diminished property values and aesthetic harm to the community. The number at the bottom was $68,000. I called my attorney. He said we'd fight it, but the hearing wasn't scheduled for another 3 weeks. In the meantime, the wall stayed up. I asked him what happens if the storm hits and the street floods. He said that's not relevant to the case. The HOA's complaint was about covenant violations, not engineering. I hung up and watched the sky turn gray. Saturday morning. The rain started just after dawn. Light at first. Steady. I stood on my back porch with coffee and watched the water beat off the concrete wall. The drainage system I'd built into the base was already working. Small channels directing runoff away from the foundation. Exactly as designed. By noon, the rain was heavier. I could hear it drumming on the roof. I checked the street. Water was starting to pool near the curbs. The drains weren't keeping up. I sent another email to Sandra. Street drainage failing. Water rising. Recommend sandbagging low properties. She replied 30 minutes later. Stop sending unnecessary emails. This is not your responsibility. You are not an HOA officer. Focus on your own property. That should have been the moment I let it go. But I didn't. I drove to the hardware store. Bought sandbags. Filled 20 of them in my driveway and stacked them along the curb in front of my neighbor's house. Older couple. John and Margaret. They'd lived here for 15 years. Their house sat even lower than mine. If the street flooded, they'd be the first hit. John came outside while I was working. Asked what I was doing. I told him. He looked at the sandbags. Then at the sky. He said Sandra told everyone the drainage was fine. That we didn't need to worry. I said Sandra was wrong. He thanked me. Went back inside. Didn't touch the sandbags. By evening, the rain was relentless. I checked the weather radar. The storm had stalled exactly where they said it would. Another 18 hours of rain expected. I walked outside. The street was covered. 4 inches of standing water. Cars were parked in driveways, owners starting to get nervous. I saw lights on in every house. People watching. Sandra's house was 3 doors down. Big colonial. Brick front. Perfectly landscaped. I saw her standing in her front window. Looking out at the street. She saw me. Didn't wave. Didn't acknowledge me. Just stared. Then closed the curtains. Sunday morning. The water was 8 inches deep. Higher in some areas. I could see it creeping up driveways. Pooling against garage doors. My wall was holding perfectly. Not a drop on my side. The lawn was dry. The house was untouched. I stood on top of the wall with my coffee. The concrete was solid under my feet. I could see the whole neighborhood from up there. That's when I saw Margaret. She was standing in her doorway, water halfway up her front steps. She was crying. John was behind her, holding a phone, trying to call someone. The sandbags I'd placed were underwater. Useless now. The water was too high. Too fast. I thought about going over, offering help. But I didn't. Just watched. Other neighbors started coming outside, wading through the water, trying to move cars. Some were using trash bags to cover vents. Others were frantically sweeping water away from their doors. It didn't matter. The water kept rising. I saw someone knock on Sandra's door. She didn't answer. By mid-morning, the street was a river. 12 inches deep. Muddy. Debris floating past. A trash can. A lawn chair. Someone's mailbox. The water was lapping against front doors now. I heard someone shout. Then another voice. Panic spreading. People were realizing this wasn't going to stop. This wasn't just a little street flooding. This was serious. That's when I got the call. Blocked number. I almost didn't answer. But I did. It was Sandra. Her voice was tight. Controlled. She said the street was flooding. Said I know. She said people were scared. I said they should be. She asked if my house was okay. Said yes. She didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she asked if I could help. If I had sandbags. Equipment. Anything. I told her I already tried to help. She told me to stop. I told her the drainage system failed because nobody maintained it. She said that wasn't true. I asked when the last inspection was. She hung up. An hour later, emergency services arrived. Fire trucks. Police. They couldn't get down the street. The water was too deep. They parked at the top of the block and waded in. I watched them knock on doors, helping people evacuate, carrying kids, leading elderly residents through waist-deep water. It was chaos. I saw Sandra come outside. She was wearing a raincoat, rain boots. She waded into the water and started talking to the fire chief, pointing at houses, gesturing. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but I saw her point at my house, at my wall. The fire chief looked, nodded, wrote something down. That's when I realized what she was doing. She was blaming me, telling them my wall was blocking drainage, redirecting water into the street, making it worse for everyone else. It wasn't true. My wall had drainage built in. It wasn't affecting the street at all. But she didn't care about the truth. She cared about control, about being right. The fire chief waded over to my property. I met him at the wall. He asked if I was the homeowner. Said yes. He asked about the wall. I explained the permit, the engineering, the drainage system. He looked at the water, then at my dry lawn. He said it's working. Said I know. He asked if I reported the drainage issues before the storm. Said yes. Multiple times. He asked to who? I said the HOA president. He wrote that down too. Then he left. By Sunday evening, the water was 16 inches deep. Some homes had water inside. First floors flooding. People were being evacuated to shelters. The street looked like a disaster zone. And my house sat in the middle of it. Completely dry. Untouched. Like an island. That's when Sandra came back. This time with 2 other board members. They stood at the edge of my wall. Water up to their thighs. She yelled up at me. Said this was my fault. That my wall was causing the flooding. That I was responsible for the damage to everyone's homes. I told her that wasn't true. She said she was going to make sure I paid for every dollar of damage. Every repair. Every insurance claim. I asked her where the HOA drainage funds went. She didn't answer. Just turned and walked away. What I didn't know then was that Sandra had just made the biggest mistake of her life. Because the fire chief didn't just write down what I said. He requested records. HOA financial documents. Maintenance logs. Drainage inspection reports. And when those records came back, everything changed. The water didn't recede until Tuesday afternoon. By then, the damage was done. 16 homes with flooded basements. 8 with water on the first floor. Cars totaled. Furniture ruined. Insurance adjusters were already walking the street, clipboards in hand, shaking their heads. The neighborhood looked like a war zone. Muddy water lines stained every house. Except mine. I stood on my wall and watched the cleanup begin. People hauling out soaked carpets. Dragging ruined couches to the curb. I saw Margaret and John carrying boxes of photo albums. Waterlogged. Destroyed. 40 years of memories turning to pulp in their hands. Margaret looked up at me. Just for a second. Then looked away. Sandra didn't come outside for 2 days. Her house had taken water too. Not as bad as some. But enough. I saw contractors going in and out. A restoration van parked in her driveway. When she finally did come out, she didn't look at me. Didn't acknowledge me. Just got in her car and left. The fire chief's records request came back on Wednesday. I didn't know about it at first. But word travels fast in a neighborhood like this. Especially when people are angry and looking for someone to blame. Someone leaked it. Posted it in the neighborhood Facebook group. The HOA's financial records. 5 years worth. And the numbers didn't add up. The HOA collected approximately $43,000 annually in fees. $1,600 per household. The stated purpose: community maintenance, landscaping, drainage system upkeep, reserve funds. But the drainage line item showed zero expenditures for the past 3 years. Not a single inspection. Not one maintenance call. Nothing. The money that was supposed to go toward keeping the storm drains clear, upgrading the pipes, improving the system, it was gone. Where did it go? Landscaping contracts paid to a company owned by Sandra's brother-in-law. Administrative fees that somehow totaled $9,000 a year. A community event budget that funded exactly 2 events, both catered by Sandra's friend's business. The math was ugly. And everyone saw it. The Facebook group exploded. People were tagging Sandra. Demanding answers. Asking why the drainage funds were diverted. Asking why nobody had inspected the system before the storm. Asking why she ignored multiple warnings. My emails were screenshot and shared. Time-stamped. Proof that I'd warned them. Proof that I'd offered to help. Proof that Sandra had told me to stop. She posted a response Thursday morning. Said the records were being misinterpreted. That the funds were allocated properly. That the storm was unprecedented and no drainage system could have handled it. That my wall had made things worse by redirecting water into the street. She said an independent investigation would prove her right. She said anyone spreading misinformation would be held accountable. Nobody believed her. The comments came fast. Angry. People demanding her resignation. Threatening to withhold HOA fees. Talking about lawsuits. One person pointed out that my house was the only one that didn't flood. That my wall worked exactly as designed. That maybe the engineer knew what he was talking about. That's when my attorney called. He said the county had received multiple complaints about the HOA's drainage maintenance. The fire chief's report included photos of the clogged drains. Documentation of my warnings. Timestamps on my emails. The county was opening an investigation. And if they found negligence, the HOA could be held liable for all the flood damage. Not just to the street. To every home. He asked if I was still being sued. Said yes. He said not for long. Because the HOA's lawsuit against me was going to look very different now. A homeowner who built a legal flood barrier and tried to warn the community versus an HOA that ignored maintenance, diverted funds, and silenced warnings. He said we should countersue. For harassment. For legal fees. For defamation. I told him to do it. Friday afternoon, Sandra knocked on my door. First time she'd ever done that. I opened it. She was standing on the other side of my wall, still on the street side. She didn't ask to come in. She just stood there. Looked exhausted. Hair pulled back. No makeup. She said she wanted to talk. I said I'm listening. She said this had gotten out of hand. That people were emotional. That they didn't understand how HOA finances worked. That the community needed to come together, not tear itself apart. I asked her directly. Where did the drainage funds go? She said they were reallocated. I asked to where. She said that was board business. I asked if the board voted on it. She didn't answer. I asked if the homeowners were notified. She said they didn't need to be. I asked her how she sleeps at night. She said I had no idea what it took to run a community like this. That people like me made her job impossible. That I was turning everyone against her. I told her I didn't have to turn anyone against her. She did that herself. I told her I warned her. Multiple times. That I tried to help. That I offered solutions. And she shut me down. Because she cared more about control than safety. More about aesthetics than engineering. More about being right than protecting the people who trusted her. She stared at me. Silent. Then she said the lawsuit wasn't going away. That she'd make sure I regretted building that wall. That I'd pay for every cent of damage to this neighborhood. I told her to talk to her lawyer. Because my countersuit was being filed Monday morning. And when the county investigation finished, she wouldn't just lose the lawsuit. She'd lose everything. She turned and walked away. Didn't say another word. I watched her wade through the mud back to her house. And I realized something. This wasn't about the wall anymore. This wasn't about the flood. This was about what happens when someone with a little bit of power decides they're untouchable. And what happens when the truth finally catches up. The county's preliminary report came out the following Tuesday. Drainage system, critically neglected. Storm drains, 60% obstructed. Last documented maintenance, 4 years ago. Cause of flooding, system failure due to lack of upkeep. The report didn't mention my wall. Because my wall had nothing to do with it. But it did mention the HOA. By name. And it recommended a full financial audit. That's when the lawsuit started. Not against me. Against Sandra. Against the HOA board. Homeowners filing claims for flood damage. Demanding the HOA cover repairs. Demanding reimbursement. Demanding accountability. The HOA's insurance company refused to pay. Said negligence wasn't covered. Said the board members were personally liable. Sandra resigned 3 days later. No announcement. No apology. Just a one-line email to the homeowners. Effective immediately, I am stepping down as HOA president. That was it. The board collapsed within a week. 2 other members resigned. 1 moved out of the neighborhood entirely. Nobody wanted to be associated with what happened. But the damage was done. And the consequences were just beginning. The HOA lawsuit against me was dismissed 6 weeks later. My attorney filed a motion to dismiss based on the county's findings. The judge didn't even schedule a hearing. Just signed the order. Case closed. The wall stayed up. Legally built. Legally protected. And now, proven necessary. But the lawsuits against the HOA were just getting started. 17 homeowners filed claims. Total damages estimated at over $400,000. The HOA's insurance refused coverage. Negligence exclusion. That meant the board members were personally liable. Sandra. The treasurer. The secretary. Everyone who signed off on diverting those drainage funds. Sandra hired a lawyer. Tried to argue the funds were used appropriately. That the storm was an act of God. That no one could have predicted it. The county's report destroyed that defense. Drainage system neglected for years. Warnings ignored. Maintenance records falsified. The evidence was overwhelming. Her lawyer eventually advised her to settle. She sold her house in March. Took a loss. Paid out settlements to 3 homeowners whose damage was the worst. John and Margaret were among them. I watched the moving truck pull up. Watched her load boxes. Furniture. A life packed up and shipped somewhere else. She didn't say goodbye to anyone. Just left. The house sold to a young couple 2 months later. They had no idea what happened there. Maybe that's for the best. The HOA dissolved entirely by summer. Not formally. It just stopped functioning. No one wanted to serve on the board. No one trusted the structure anymore. Fees stopped being collected. The common areas went unmaintained for a while. Eventually, the homeowners formed a neighborhood association instead. Voluntary. Transparent. Every expense voted on. Every record public. I was asked to join the steering committee. I declined. I'd done my part. The county mandated a full drainage overhaul. Grant money. Federal disaster relief funds. They dug up the old pipes. Installed new ones. Wider. Modern. Cleared every drain. Regrade the streets. It took 8 months. Cost the county nearly $2 million. But when the next storm came through 18 months later, the street didn't flood. Not even close. The system worked. Just like it was supposed to. My wall became a strange kind of landmark. People would drive by just to see it. The house that didn't flood. Some neighbors thanked me, said I was right, said they wished they'd listened. Others never spoke to me again. They couldn't look at that wall without being reminded of what they lost. Of what could have been prevented. I understood. Grudges don't fade just because you were proven right. Margaret knocked on my door one afternoon. Late summer. She brought cookies. Pomade. She said she wanted to thank me. For the sandbags. For trying. She said they'd lost almost everything on their first floor. Photos. Heirlooms. Things you can't replace. But they rebuilt. Insurance covered most of it. Sandra's settlement covered the rest. She said they were staying. This was still their home. She asked if I ever regretted building the wall. I told her no. Not for a second. John passed away the following winter. Heart attack. Unrelated to the flood. But Margaret told me the stress didn't help. The months of repairs. The fighting with insurance. The anger at Sandra. At the HOA. At a system that failed them. She said he never really recovered. Not emotionally. I went to the funeral. Small service. Quiet. I stood in the back. Margaret saw me. Nodded. That was enough. The financial audit results were released publicly in the fall. Worse than anyone expected. Nearly $73,000 misallocated over 5 years. Landscaping contracts inflated. Administrative fees with no documentation. Community event funds spent on personal expenses. Sandra's name was on most of the approvals. The treasurer had enabled it. The rest of the board had looked the other way. The local news picked it up. Ran a segment. HOA negligence leads to flood disaster. My house was in the B-roll footage. The wall. The dry lawn. Tantras. I got calls after that. Other engineers. Homeowners in flood zones. People asking for advice. Wanting to know if they should build walls. If their HOAs could stop them. If it was worth the fight. I told them the same thing every time. Know your rights. Get your permits. Don't assume anyone else is looking out for you. Because when the water comes, you're on your own. The neighborhood recovered. Slowly. New families moved in. Kids playing in the street again. Lawns repaired. Houses repainted. Life moved on. But the memory stayed. People still talked about it. The flood. The HOA. The wall. Some stories become part of a place. This one did. I still get letters sometimes. From the new HOA. Sorry, the neighborhood association. Asking if I'd consider serving. Asking for advice on drainage issues. Asking for engineering consultations. I help when I can. But I keep my distance. I learned something during all of this. You can be right. You can have the data. The permits. The proof. And people will still fight you. Because being right threatens the people who need to be in control. Sandra never apologized. Not to me. Not to the neighborhood. Not publicly. I heard through someone that she moved 2 states away. Started over. I don't know if she learned anything. I don't know if she ever accepted responsibility. Maybe she tells herself it wasn't her fault. That the storm was the problem. That I was the problem. That's easier than admitting you failed people who trusted you. But here's what I know. $37,000. That's what it cost to build my wall. Engineered. Permitted. Built to last. The neighborhood's flood damage totaled over $400,000. The county's drainage overhaul cost $2 million. John's stress-related health decline. Priceless. Margaret's lost heirlooms. Priceless. The trust destroyed in that community. Priceless. All of it could have been prevented. Not by my wall. By basic maintenance. By listening. By putting safety over aesthetics. By doing the job they were trusted to do. But Sandra chose control over competence. And when the water came, everyone paid the price. Except me. I still live here. Same house. Same wall. It's not ugly anymore. Not to me. It's a reminder that sometimes doing the right thing means standing alone. That sometimes the people in charge care more about looking right than being right. And that when you know something's coming, you prepare. Even if no one believes you. The wall still stands. 6 feet of reinforced concrete. Grit. Solid. Unmovable. Neighbors drive past it every day. Some see an eyesore. Some see common sense. I see the reason my house didn't flood. The reason I'm still here. The reason I can stand in my yard and watch the rain without worrying. 3 years later, property values in the neighborhood have rebounded. The new drainage system helps. But my house? It sells for more now. Because everyone knows. When the next storm comes, this house will be dry. The wall guarantees it. That's worth something. More than curb appeal. More than aesthetic unity. More than Sandra's approval ever was. So if you're ever in a situation like this, if someone with a little authority tells you you're wrong, if they dismiss your concerns, if they prioritize appearances over safety, ask yourself this. When the water rises, who do you trust? The person with the data and the permits? Or the person with the gavel and the ego? Because one day, the water will rise. It always does. And when it does, that ugly wall might be the only thing standing between you and everything you have to lose.